Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. Today I'm back again doing another video, and the topic of today's video is going to be me ranking every NBA Finals runner-up since the 1999 to 2000 season. So that's the past 20 seasons. I'm going to be ranking them from what I think are the least impressive runners-up to the most impressive runners-up, and this list is going to be primarily based on um, the makeup of the team as far as their players, who they had to face in the playoffs, and then ultimately who they faced in the finals, and like why they lost the series or why they didn't succeed in their goal. So it's the worst team to lose in the finals uh, of any of these competitors. I have the 2018 Cavaliers. They had LeBron and nothing else. They had George Hill, Kevin Love. Kevin Love was actually pretty decent this season, but besides a Kevin Love who was averaging like 16 and 10, they really didn't have anything else on this team. They had J.R. Smith who was past his prime, George Hill past his prime, Tristan Thompson underperforming. Kyle Korver well past his prime, and then a plethora of like interesting young pieces that didn't really work out, like Larry Nance, Jordan Clarkson, and Rodney Hood. And they got swept in the finals, and they faced a really weak Eastern Conference competition, and they were pushed to 7 games twice versus the Pacers and versus the Celtics. So to me, they didn't really seem like a team that warranted um, like if everybody was healthy and if Kyrie was healthy on the Celtics, they probably beat the Cavs, and the Cavs don't even make the finals that year. Next, I have the '07 Cavaliers. Same story, mostly different players. You've got LeBron surrounded by an older, just getting out of his prime Ilgauskas. Um, You've got, let's see who else on this team. Larry Hughes, who really played badly in the playoffs, despite being like their second option technically, and not much else really. And you know it's bad when, like you could argue the fourth best player on your team's name is Booby. Booby Gibson, yes, I'm sure you guys don't hear that name very often, but yes, Daniel Booby Gibson was like LeBron's spot up shooter in the corner for threes, and he was like their fourth best player on this team, so that is sad. Um, the only difference here to me is that they played a lot better defense than 2018 Cavs, and they faced tougher competition in the East because they faced uh, the Chauncey Billups led Pistons, who, although they didn't have Ben Wallace anymore, were still a formidable foe at that point. Next, I have the 2015 Cavaliers. So, yes, the bottom of this list has a trend. LeBron, let me just say this LeBron dragged a lot of teams to the finals and gave a lot of teams chances that they shouldn't really have had. So I'm really referring to this 2015 finals edition of this Cavaliers team. Leading up to the finals, they were a really good team. You had LeBron, K Love, and Irving, and they had a pretty good regular season. I think winning 53 games. I think 53 games. But they lost Kevin Love like in game one of the first round, so then they were a little bit worse off. And then they lost Kyrie for uh, for like half of the Eastern Conference Finals, and then he came back for the last 2 games, I believe. And then he went out at the end of game one in the finals, which the Cavs, by the way, barely lost, which was impressive because if you consider that they would have won that game, they would have been up 3-0 in that series, and at that point, the Warriors are probably mentally fatigued enough that the Cavs probably win that series. So let's say that Kyrie's ankle holds out for game one of that finals. Um, you actually probably have them winning that finals because they probably win game one. They would have won game two and three still. And I think, no team's ever come back from 3-0. So I think the Cavs probably win that series considering game four is in Cleveland. But despite that, when you look at that actual finals team, you had LeBron, and technically his second best player in that series was like Timofey Mozgov. So yeah, that was a bad team. Um, Next, I have the 01 76ers, a team that really. I'm actually going to loop in the 02 Nets here and the 03 Nets. Those three teams are all very similar. All teams that got caught up in. Actually, even on top of that, I'll throw in the 2000 Pacers. So in this order, I have 76ers in 01, Nets in 02, Nets in 03, Pacers in 2000. Um, So why do I have them in that specific order? Well, Sixers were the least impressive of the four, I think, and faced the least competition in the East. In that the Pacers had already fallen off and the Nets really hadn't come together by that point. Next, I have the '02 Nets, and the only reason I have the '03 Nets higher is that Richard Jefferson was a better contributor on the '03 Nets, and then also they pushed the Spurs to 6 in the finals versus the year before versus the Lakers when they got swept. So they made it more of a series in '03 than in 2002. And then the 2000 Pacers are above them because they had the most depth and the most complete best roster out of any of these four teams. And I believe they won also 56 or 58 games, so they were tied for they either were tied for the most wins of these four teams or they had the most wins. But they had an older Mark Jackson, older Reggie Miller, in his prime Jalen Rose. They had an older Chris Mullin. They had Sam Perkins. They had Antonio Davis and Rick Smits. And that's actually a really deep team when you look at like those 8 dudes. Um, is that 8? Yeah, I believe that's 8 or 7 guys. But they had another guy I'm forgetting about. But they had a pretty good team as far as depth. And they were the most complete of these four teams, but they all can be lumped together because they're all the vacuum Eastern Conference teams. And what I mean by that is when the Bulls left the competitive sphere when Jordan left, and then also after the Knicks fell apart with like a lot of their all-star level talent leaving and like Patrick Ewing leaving and breaking down, there was this void because the two big powerhouses of the East for the longest time, the Bulls and the Knicks, were gone, and it was kind of like, well, somebody has to make the finals, and these 4 years are when these teams who really in any other year would not have made the finals made the finals. And all got pretty beat up when they got to the finals, by the way. They collectively, let's see here, collectively they went 5-16 in those 4 years in the finals. So those teams on average, they averaged getting beat 4-1 in the finals, which is pretty bad. Next, I have the '04 Lakers, who were probably the most talented team of any of these losers on paper, but they struggled with their chemistry a lot, and they got beaten pretty badly by a team that they were favored against. They lost 4-1 to the Pistons, so they really should have won that series, I think. On paper, they had more talent, but it's pretty cool that that Pistons team won, actually, when you think about it. Um, Next, I have the '08 Lakers, who I think I'm only putting a little bit higher than the '04 because I think the '08 Lakers are a team with more chemistry. They didn't have Bynum in the finals, though, which I think limits them, and they weren't going to be able to win that finals without him because he was a pretty big part of that team. But they did pretty well considering that for most of that season, Kwame Brown was a major contributor on that team. And so when you consider that you had an albatross like that around your neck and you're still able to do pretty well, that's impressive. They were able to trade him and Marc Gasol for Pau Gasol, so that was a pretty good trade on their part. Next, I have the '09 Magic. This team again got beat kind of bad in the finals, 4-1, and even when they won Game 3 and were only down 2-1, I feel like everybody was kind of like collectively, I feel like the sentiment was like, "Aw, the Magic won a game. That's nice for them." But nobody thought that they'd win the series really, and they just seemed kind of overmatched. And a team that probably, if the Celtics were healthy, they would have not gotten even to the Eastern Conference Finals. And so obviously they wouldn't have gotten to the finals then. Next, I have the 2019 Warriors. I'm taking the team that played in the finals, which didn't have Kevin Durant and which had Klay Thompson injured for most of the series. So that team, if you don't remember, really the core of that team was like Steph, Sean Livingston, a very old Andre Iguodala, Draymond, and a banged up Boogie Cousins. And that team, in and of itself, not that impressive. So that's why I have them quite a bit lower. Like if we're talking a team with Durant and with Klay Thompson, it's a different story because they're probably on the winners list rather than the runners ups list. But if you take that five as your core five, it's an average team. But they still, despite those major injuries, pushed the Raptors to 6 games. So I give them a lot of credit for that, and I put them a bit higher on the list because of that. Next, I have the 2012 Thunder. They lost 4-1. They got beat pretty handily. They were actually favored going into the series. Very few people remember that, but that is a point that I want to bring up is that they were supposed to win this finals, not heavily, but they were like the clear-cut favorite, and the Heat were the underdogs actually, based on regular season success. And after game one, when the Thunder won, people were like, "Man, are the Heat gonna lose this? Is the Big Three gonna break up?" Little did they know that actually the Thunder would be the ones going home in five, and their Big Three would get broken up. But yeah, so a team here who I think really um, underperformed in that finals a lot, and I think that should have been like a 7 game series, but they really just didn't have the mental fortitude at that point in their careers to um, bounce back after losing that game two at home. Really, that really um, hampered them a lot mentally, I think. Next runner up, I have the 2011 Heat, a team that conceivably could have won their finals, but because of a choke job by LeBron and others, but like 90% LeBron, they lost that finals. But you could say that they were the more talented team than the Mavs. You could say that um, you could say that this Heat team should have really won the finals if not for a little bit of different circumstances. But like if the Heat defend that last shot by Dirk in Game 2 of the finals, the Heat probably win that game because that was a 2-point game if you don't remember. If the Heat like make one more shot in that game or defend that Dirk final layup a little bit better, they are up 3-0 in that series and they probably win that finals because people maybe don't remember. They won game one handily. They lost game two by 2 points at home, and then they won game three by a pretty close margin, like I think within like 6 or 8 points. So, but if they like defend that layup, they probably end up winning game two because that layup was what sent it to OT, I believe, and then the Mavericks just had more gas in the tank and won game two in overtime. But if they defend that layup, the Mavs lose that game and go, and then the series pretty much probably ends up being Heat up 3-0, and they probably win the finals then. But they choked miserably. Next, 2014 Heat, putting them next to here because they're pretty similar in that it's basically the same core. Just I think they played a lot better together and they lost the finals due to injury. And the Spurs were a much more put together team, and the Heat just weren't really equipped to handle them by that point. With I think more animosity amongst the inner circle, and then also injuries playing a big part in that series. As far as Bosh not really being healthy anymore, Wade not really being healthy. Bosh was actually fairly healthy, but just older, and Wade's knees were breaking down, and it was basically LeBron versus the world, but with a more notable supporting cast, I'd say. Next, I have the '06 Mavs, who, based on how refereeing went, you could argue should have won that finals when they played the Heat. I don't think it's as egregious as people think. I actually just have the Mavs really high up here on this list because I think that they were like a super talented team, and I think like if the circumstances were a little bit different, or maybe if this is like a longer series, like if they play best out of 11 instead of best out of 7, maybe the Mavs pull it out. I think that the Heat just hit their stride at the right time, and the Mavs were unfortunately the team that suffered because of that. Next, I have the '05 Pistons, who lost in 7 games, and if not for Rasheed Wallace making a boneheaded mistake, the Pistons likely win that series. And so they were a really good team. They would have been back-to-back champs if that would have happened, and we're kind of getting into the sphere here where it's kind of like either team I think could have won the finals, and it just so happens that this is the team that lost, but really they were a championship caliber team who was like right there, right on the brink of being the champion. So the Pistons are my first entry in that list. Next, I have the 2010 Celtics, who also lost in 7 games. Um, and I don't like the excuse that people say like the Celtics only lost that series because Kendrick Perkins couldn't play in Game 7. People are making him out to be a bigger contributor on that team than he was. Like I know that he provided great interior defense and he was a defensive anchor, but I think he also only played like 25 minutes a game on that team, contributing like 7 rebounds and like 3 points a game. And I get that he was a defensive anchor, but they also had Garnett doing that, and I think that that's an overrated excuse for Celtics fans. But I think that they were another team that was just right there, almost won it, and they just the the ball didn't bounce their way on a few possessions, and they lost in Game 7. But they really could have won it. That is the saddest I've ever been in an NBA Finals game because at that time I hated the Lakers, and so I was so upset with the Celtics because they were up by like 15 in the third quarter and they somehow lost that game. I was just so flippin' pissed. um, the 2017 Cavaliers next at number 3, a team that if they were facing anybody besides the Kevin Durant Warriors, they would have won the finals that year, but because Durant went to the Warriors, they weren't going to win it. But this is a really good Cavs team, basically as good as the year before when they won the finals, just they were facing a way tougher team the next year when the Warriors had Durant. As my runner-up of the runner-ups list, I have the 2013 Spurs, who lost in 7 games. We're like a second away from winning in Game 6, but Ray Allen makes the most clutch shot in NBA history. But really, the Spurs could have pretty easily won this finals in 6 games if not for that shot. But just Ray Allen had the mojo right in that moment, and it propelled the Heat to win that game in overtime. And then the Heat were kind of like running on adrenaline and won Game 6 or Game 7. And the Spurs really lost a series that felt like, to I think most people, that was theirs for the taking. And we don't have to often say this about the Tim Duncan led teams, but Tim Duncan had this bunny layup that he missed. I believe it was I can't remember if it was Game 6 or Game 7. Um, it was in one of the 2 games. I believe Game 6. But he missed like a bunny layup, and they lost the game because of it. And he just had this blank expression on his face of like disgust with himself. And it was kind of shocking to see this dude who had been a 4-time champ at that point miss such a simple shot. It was literally layup, an uncontested layup, and he missed it. And everybody was shocked that he missed it, and it was a fascinating moment in NBA history. So yeah, they were like that close, an uncontested layup away from winning the finals. And then finally, I put the 16 Warriors, who won 73 games in the top spot. That game came down, or that series came down to the last minute of Game 7. They basically lost based on that Kyrie clutch 3 with like a minute left. But you look at this list and they were the best of any of these teams where the series could have gone either way because they were a 73-win team. But those Warriors, the 13 Spurs, the 2010 Celtics, the 05 Pistons, all teams who were like right there, and they just had like a couple or maybe 1 or 2 tiny things that went against them that were the reason they lost the finals. But I think it's so funny because that Warriors team is going to be remembered as like the ultimate loser because they lost on the biggest stage when they were probably the heaviest favorite there's ever been in a while. And that team's going to be remembered as a group of people who lost rather than this group of people who really won everything leading up to that, and then they lost that last game by like a handful of points when they were just right there and it was all theirs. So it's crazy how these teams like the 2013 Spurs are remembered as the team that lost rather than the team that won, except for that one little shot by Ray Allen. And just the margin, the margin between winning and losing is so negligible that it's crazy that then one team becomes a champ and one team goes down as the loser. But like the difference in some cases could be like 2 points, which is crazy. That a whole NBA season, which if you include playoffs is like over 100 games, can come down in the last minutes to like 2 points. But that can determine who goes down in the record books as the champ and who doesn't. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It took some time to put together doing the ranking. And if you haven't, check out the other video I did ranking all the NBA champs from 2000 and 2019. It's different than this list because those teams are obviously different than these teams. And just because they all these teams played those teams doesn't mean the rankings are the same. So check that out if you haven't. Leave your thoughts below on this video, and hope you have a good day. Bye.